They were called the Watchers, angels sent to guide mankind, but they broke the boundary between heaven and earth and took human wives. Their children, not just giants, but creatures so violent, so corrupt, that God didn't just punish mankind. He punished the angels too. Tonight, we explore one of the most disturbing chapters in ancient religious literature, a story that transforms our understanding of evil itself. This is the account of the Watchers, preserved in the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, texts that reveal what Genesis only hints at, that the corruption of the antediluvian world wasn't just human wickedness, but the result of a forbidden union between the divine and mortal realms. Most people know the basic outline of the flood story. Mankind became wicked. God sent the flood. Noah and his family survived. But the ancient texts tell a far more complex and terrifying tale. They speak of angels who abandoned their heavenly posts, of hybrid offspring who terrorized the earth, and of a corruption so profound that it required not just the destruction of humanity, but the imprisonment of the divine beings who had caused the catastrophe. The story begins with an act of cosmic rebellion. According to the Book of Enoch, 200 angels were sent to watch over humanity in its early days, to guide and protect the descendants of Adam. But these watchers became fascinated by human women, and what started as divine guardianship became forbidden desire. Led by angels named Semyaza and Azazel, they made a pact to descend to earth and take human wives, knowing full well that they were violating the fundamental order of creation. This wasn't a simple tale of fallen angels. It was a story of cosmic boundaries being shattered. The Watchers didn't just fall from grace. They physically descended from heaven to earth, abandoning their spiritual nature to experience physical desires. In doing so, they created something new and terrible, hybrid beings that belonged fully to neither heaven nor earth, creatures that would become the stuff of nightmares. The offspring of these unions were the Nephilim, beings whose very existence was an affront to the natural order. The ancient texts describe them not as noble giants, but as monsters whose appetites were as vast as their size. They devoured animals, humans, and eventually turned on each other, soaking the earth in blood and creating a reign of terror that threatened to destroy all life. But this story doesn't end with the flood. According to the Book of Enoch, while the physical bodies of the Nephilim were destroyed, their spirits survived, becoming the demons that continue to plague humanity. This presents a radically different understanding of the nature of evil. Demons aren't fallen angels, but the disembodied souls of the giant hybrids, carrying within them the rage and corruption of their angelic fathers and human mothers. Who were these Watchers, and what exactly did they teach humanity? How did their rebellion change the very nature of evil? And if their children's spirits still roam the earth, what does that mean for our understanding of the spiritual forces that oppose humanity? The Book of Enoch provides the most detailed account of the Watchers' rebellion, filling in the gaps left by the cryptic reference in Genesis to the sons of God, who took human wives. According to this ancient text, the Watchers were not ordinary angels, but a specific class of divine beings assigned to observe and guide humanity during its early development. The text names the leaders of this rebellion with precise detail. Semyaza, described as the chief of the Watchers, was the one who first conceived the plan to take human wives. But it was Azazel who became the most notorious, teaching humanity the arts of war, cosmetics, and metallurgy, knowledge that was meant to remain in heaven. Together, these 200 angels bound themselves with mutual oaths knowing that their actions would bring divine judgment upon them. The rebellion wasn't spontaneous, but carefully planned. The Watchers understood the magnitude of their transgression, yet they proceeded anyway. Driven by desires that overcame their divine nature, they descended to Mount Hermon, where they took their oaths and began their corruption of humanity. The location itself became significant, a place where heaven and earth met, where the boundary between the divine and mortal realms was first violated. The corruption that followed wasn't limited to the sexual unions between angels and humans. The Watchers began teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, the secrets of warfare, astrology, magic, and technology that were meant to remain divine prerogatives. Azazel taught men to make weapons and armor, while other Watchers revealed the movements of the stars, the properties of plants, and the arts of divination. This knowledge transformed human civilization, but not for the better. The text suggests that humanity wasn't ready for these divine secrets, that the premature revelation of heavenly wisdom led to violence, corruption, and spiritual decay. The Watchers' gifts became curses, their teachings became tools of destruction, and their wisdom became the foundation of human wickedness. The offspring of the Watchers and human women were even more problematic. The Nephilim were described as giants, but their size was the least of their problems. According to the Book of Enoch, these hybrid beings possessed appetites that no earthly food could satisfy. They began by devouring the produce of human labor, then moved on to animals, and finally to humans themselves. The text provides disturbing details about the nature of these creatures. They were not just physically powerful, but possessed knowledge and abilities inherited from their angelic fathers. They could not be contained by ordinary means, and their presence on earth created a reign of terror that threatened to destroy all life. The Nephilim fought among themselves, creating wars that devastated the earth and turned the ground red with blood. The Book of Jubilees adds another layer to this narrative, describing how the Watchers' rebellion affected the very structure of creation. The text suggests that the union between angels and humans didn't just produce hybrid offspring, but corrupted the spiritual atmosphere of the earth itself. The presence of these beings created a kind of spiritual pollution that affected all life, making the earth itself cry out for cleansing. The corruption spread beyond the immediate offspring of the Watchers. The text describes how the knowledge and violence introduced by the Nephilim infected human society, creating a cascade of evil that eventually encompassed all of humanity, except for the family of Noah. The sins of the Watchers became the sins of the world. Their rebellion became humanity's rebellion, and their corruption became the corruption of all flesh. The ancient texts also reveal that the Watchers continued their rebellion even after producing the Nephilim. They taught their hybrid children the forbidden arts, passing down angelic knowledge to beings who had no divine restraint to moderate their use of it. The result was a generation of monsters who possessed both supernatural power and unlimited appetite for destruction. As the violence and corruption spread, the earth itself began to cry out for justice. The Book of Enoch describes how the blood of the innocent reached heaven, how the suffering of creation became a testimony against the Watchers and their offspring. The very fabric of creation was being torn apart by the presence of beings who belonged fully to neither heaven nor earth. The situation became so desperate that God was forced to intervene, not just against humanity, but against the divine beings who had caused the corruption. This wasn't just a human crisis, but a cosmic one, requiring a response that would address both the immediate threat and the spiritual contamination. that had spread throughout the earth. The climax of the Watchers' story comes with God's response to their rebellion and the chaos their offspring had created. This wasn't just the judgment of mankind that we read about in Genesis. It was a cosmic intervention that targeted both the human and divine perpetrators of the corruption that had overwhelmed the earth. According to the book of Enoch, God sent the archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel to deal with the crisis. Each was assigned specific tasks in the divine response to the Watchers' rebellion. Gabriel was sent to destroy the Nephilim by turning them against each other, ensuring that they would destroy themselves in civil war. Michael was commanded to bind Semyaza and the other Watchers in the valleys of the earth, where they would remain imprisoned until the final judgment. But it was Raphael who received perhaps the most significant assignment, the binding of Azazel. The text describes how this chief corrupter was bound hand and foot and cast into the darkness of the desert, where he would remain until the day of judgment. The location chosen was deliberate, a place of desolation that reflected the spiritual wasteland that Azazel's teachings had created on earth. The destruction of the Nephilim was particularly dramatic. Rather than simply killing them, God arranged for them to destroy each other, turning their violence against themselves. The text describes how these giants, who had terrorized the earth, became consumed with rage against their own kind, engaging in wars that eliminated their entire race. The earth that had been soaked with the blood of their victims was now soaked with their own blood. But the most disturbing element of the divine judgment concerns what happened to the spirits of the Nephilim after their physical destruction. According to the book of Enoch, because these beings were hybrids, part angel, part human, their souls could not simply pass into death like ordinary humans. Instead, they became disembodied spirits, trapped on earth and filled with the rage and corruption of their destroyed physical forms. The text explicitly states that these spirits of the dead Nephilim became the demons that continue to plague humanity. This presents a radically different understanding of the nature of demonic forces. They are not fallen angels, but the ghosts of the giant hybrids, carrying within them the combined corruption of their angelic fathers and human mothers. These demons retain the supernatural knowledge inherited from the Watchers, but lack the physical forms that once contained their malevolent desires. This interpretation explains why demons in ancient literature are often described as seeking to possess human bodies. They are trying to regain the physical existence that was taken from them in the flood. The spirits of the Nephilim, according to this account, are literally homeless, wandering the earth in search of the embodied existence they once knew. The binding of the Watchers themselves was equally significant. These once mighty angels were imprisoned in the earth, conscious but powerless, aware of the consequences of their rebellion, but unable to act. The text suggests that they remain in this state of imprisonment, waiting for the final judgment when they will face the ultimate consequences of their actions. The flood that followed was not just a cleansing of human wickedness, but a cosmic reset, washing away the physical remnants of the forbidden union between heaven and earth. The waters covered not just the corruption of humanity, but the blood of the Nephilim, the traces of angelic technology, and the physical evidence of the Watchers' rebellion. But the spiritual consequences of the Watchers' rebellion continued even after the flood. The demons that arose from the spirits of the Nephilim remained active, and according to the book of Enoch, they continue to influence human affairs, teaching the same forbidden knowledge that their angelic fathers had revealed. The corruption that caused the flood was not entirely eliminated, but transformed, becoming a spiritual rather than physical threat. The text also reveals that the knowledge taught by the Watchers was not completely lost in the flood. Some of their teachings survived, preserved by demons and passed down through human generations, ensuring that the corruption they introduced would continue to influence human civilization. The arts of war, magic, and manipulation that Azazel taught continued to plague humanity, now spread by the spirits of his hybrid children. The story of the Watchers presents a vision of evil that is both ancient and startlingly relevant to our modern understanding of spiritual warfare. If the books of Enoch and Jubilees preserve authentic traditions, then the demons that oppose humanity are not abstract forces of evil, but the literal spirits of hybrid giants, carrying within them the rage and corruption of their angelic fathers and human mothers. This interpretation transforms our understanding of the spiritual forces that influence human affairs. The demons that the ancient texts describe are not distant, impersonal entities, but beings with a specific history and a personal grudge against humanity. They are the offspring of the Watchers' rebellion, the spiritual remnants of creatures who once walked the earth as its most terrifying inhabitants. The text challenges our modern assumptions about the nature of evil and the origin of spiritual opposition to humanity. In this version, demons aren't fallen angels, but the ghosts of hybrid giants, beings who lost their physical forms in the flood, but retained their supernatural knowledge and malevolent desires. They represent the ongoing consequences of the Watchers' rebellion, the spiritual pollution that continues to affect the earth long after the physical corruption was washed away. Most Christians have never heard this version of the story, but it was once widely known among Jewish and early Christian communities. The books of Enoch and Jubilees were read alongside Genesis, providing the detailed background that the canonical text only hints at. This understanding of demons as the spirits of the Nephilim influenced exorcism practices, spiritual warfare strategies, and theological discussions about the nature of evil. The story also raises profound questions about the ongoing influence of the Watchers' rebellion. If demons are indeed the spirits of the Nephilim, then they carry within them not just generic evil, but the specific corruption introduced by their angelic fathers. They possess the forbidden knowledge that the Watchers taught, the supernatural abilities inherited from their divine ancestry, and the rage of beings who were destroyed by divine judgment. Whether these ancient texts preserve historical fact or theological interpretation, they offer a compelling explanation for the persistence of evil in the world. They suggest that the spiritual forces that oppose humanity are not abstract principles, but specific beings with a particular history and a personal investment in human destruction. And if demons came from the Nephilim, does that mean they still carry the rage of their lost fathers? The text suggests that they do, that the demons who plague humanity are driven not just by malevolent desire, but by the fury of beings who were cast down from their hybrid existence, who lost their physical forms and their place in the world through divine judgment. The Watchers remain bound in the earth, awaiting final judgment. Their hybrid children roam as disembodied spirits, seeking the physical existence they once knew. And humanity continues to struggle with the spiritual consequences of a rebellion that began before the flood, but whose effects echo through every generation, reminding us that some boundaries should never be crossed, some knowledge should never be revealed, and some unions should never be attempted.